The fluorescent light above the subway platform pulsed, a rhythmic, buzzing strobe that made the station walls feel like they were closing in. Sarah stood directly beneath it. She pulled her purse closer, her fingers digging into the thin material until she found the edge of the only bill left inside. $1. That was the sum of her resources. She stepped toward the vending machine, her boots scraping against the concrete. She needed to buy something, anything to bring home, but the glass was dark and cold. She leaned in, her forehead pressing against the hard surface, and squinted at the row of slots. A red light blinked with a cruel clarity over the bread. Sold out, the machine hummed. A low, mechanical drone that seemed to mock the ache in her stomach. She looked at the dollar in her hand, then back at the empty coil. Her daughter was waiting at home. The silence of the station was heavy, filled only by the distant, grinding sound of an approaching train that would not be stopping for her. Sarah pulled back from the glass, the cold air of the platform stinging her face. She turned to leave, but a rhythmic clicking sound caught her attention. Near the base of a concrete pillar, an elderly man sat huddled against the tiles. His hands were thin, mapped with veins, and they were shaking violently. He gripped a small, plastic medicine bottle, his thumb pressing repeatedly against the child-proof cap. It would not budge. He twisted his wrist, his knuckles turning white, but the cap remained locked in place. He stopped, his shoulders sagging, and let out a jagged, rattling breath that seemed to vibrate in his chest. Sarah watched him for a long moment. The man did not look up. He stared at the bottle as if it were the only thing in the world that mattered. She looked down at her own hand, still clutching the $1 bill. The hunger in her stomach felt different now. Less like a sharp, personal failure and more like a quiet, shared weight. She took a step toward him, her movements deliberate, closing the distance between her own desperation and his silent, failing struggle. She stopped just inches from him. The man did not move, his eyes locked on the floor, his breath coming in shallow, ragged hitches. Sarah did not speak. Words felt too small for the weight of the air between them. She knelt, her knees hitting the cold tiles with a dull thud. She opened her palm and held out the dollar bill. It was creased, soft from being handled, the only thing that stood between her and total emptiness. The man paused. His hand stopped shaking for a fraction of a second as he registered the offering. He slowly lifted his head, his gaze meeting hers. There was a sudden, sharp clarity in his eyes that pierced through the dim, flickering station gloom. He looked at the money, then back at her, his lips parting as if to ask why. She did not pull back. She pressed the bill into his palm, her fingers brushing against his cold, papery skin. He closed his fist around the currency, his knuckles trembling once more, but this time with a different intensity. A profound, silent recognition passed between them, a bridge built in the middle of a hollow, indifferent world. The man pushed himself up from the floor, his joints popping in the silence of the platform. He walked to the vending machine, fed the dollar through the slot, and pressed the button. A plastic bottle dropped. He unscrewed the cap with steady hands, drank deeply, and returned to where Sarah stood. He reached into a side pocket and pulled out a worn, leather-bound notebook. It was thick, the edges frayed and dark with years of handling. He pressed it into her hands. "I have nothing else," he whispered, his voice raspy like dry leaves. "But this contains the blueprints for a patent I could never afford to file." Sarah felt the heft of the book, the paper inside dense and crisp. She looked at him, wanting to ask questions, but he had already turned away toward the exit. She tucked the book under her arm and headed for the stairs. Her stomach gave a sharp, painful twist, a reminder of the meal she had traded away. She climbed the concrete steps, the weight of the notebook pressing against her side. Outside, the night air was biting, but she did not speed up. She walked, her grip on the leather cover tightening, her mind already beginning to untangle the gravity of what she now carried. Sarah entered the apartment. The kitchen was dark, save for the hum of the refrigerator. She placed the notebook on the chipped laminate table. Her daughter was asleep in the next room. Sarah pulled up a chair and opened the cover. The pages were yellowed, covered in dense, precise lines and mathematical notations. She spent the first hour simply categorizing the sketches. These were not random scribbles. They were complex, multi-layered designs for a high-efficiency power turbine. She reached for a pen to trace the flow of the mechanism. The logic was sound, the mathematics elegant, and the application far beyond anything currently on the market. Her hunger flared again, but she ignored it, pinning the pages flat with her elbows. As the small lamp flickered, the reality of the situation solidified. This was not just a collection of ideas. It was a blueprint worth millions. She looked toward the bedroom door where her daughter slept. The weight of the world shifted. This notebook was the mechanism that could end the cycle of empty cupboards and subway station desperation. She leaned closer, the lead of her pencil scratching against the paper as she began to draft a plan of action. The public library opened its doors at 8. Sarah was the first in line, the notebook tucked deep inside her bag. She claimed the corner terminal, the keyboard sticky and the monitor flickering with a low-frequency hum. She spent the first day transcribing the technical specifications into digital form. Each email she sent was a shot in the dark. She attached the scanned diagrams, hit send, and watched the status bar crawl toward completion. Hour after hour, the inbox remained empty. By the third day, the library staff began to recognize her. She sat in the same chair until closing, her fingers cramped from constant typing. A system error wiped a draft, forcing her to restart a complex section from memory. She didn't leave her seat for lunch. She didn't look at the clock until the overhead lights dimmed, signaling 5 minutes to closing. The frustration bit deep. She opened a new window, typed the name of one final firm, and attached the file. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she clicked send. The screen froze. She held her breath, staring at the spinning icon. Then, the confirmation chime pinged. She stood up, her legs stiff, and walked out into the cold air, empty-handed and exhausted. The apartment was silent. Sarah sat at the small kitchen table, watching the digital clock on the wall. She was tired, the kind of exhaustion that settles deep in the bones. Then, the phone on the counter buzzed. It skittered across the laminate surface, vibrating with a sharp, insistent rattle. She reached for it, her hand trembling. A strange area code. She pressed the button and held it to her ear. "Is this Sarah? We received your files," the voice on the other end said. It was crisp, professional, and detached. "We have reviewed the turbine designs. They are revolutionary. We want to discuss a full partnership immediately." The room seemed to expand. Sarah stood up, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. She gripped the edge of the table to steady herself. "Yes," she managed to say. "I'm here." The representative listed details, legal meetings, funding, immediate retainers. The numbers were astronomical. Sarah looked at her daughter, still sleeping in the next room, and then at the notebook. The cycle of the last few years snapped. She lowered the phone, the screen still glowing in her palm, and finally took a breath that reached the bottom of her lungs. Success had not brought the peace she expected. Instead, it brought a singular, gnawing urgency. Every morning, Sarah descended the stairs to the station, her eyes darting through the shifting masses. She navigated the morning rush, her feet moving against the tide of commuters. The platform was a blur of movement and noise. She checked the bench where they had first met. It was occupied by a businessman reading a paper, his face hidden. She circled the pillar, heart hammering against her ribs, searching for the familiar, trembling hands. At one point, a man turned toward the exit, his posture hunched, and Sarah surged forward, hand outstretched, only to realize it was a stranger. He looked at her with confusion as she pulled back, her breath hitching in the stale air. She paced the length of the platform, the trains screaming in and out of the tunnel, each departure leaving the station emptier than before. The man was nowhere. She stood near the tracks, the wind of a passing train whipping past her, her pulse racing with the fear that she had missed her only chance to say thank you. She looked at the empty space where he had sat, and the reality of his absence tightened in her chest like a physical weight. Sarah stood before the bench, her feet heavy. The morning crowd surged around her, indifferent to the space she occupied. She looked down, expecting only the cold, stained tiles. Instead, she saw a piece of paper pinned under a heavy metal bolt. She reached out, her fingers catching on the rough edge of the paper. It was folded once. She pulled it free, her heart rhythm changing as she unfolded the sheet. A check fell into her palm, $10,000. Her eyes skipped to the message, scribbled in steady, deliberate ink. Thank you for seeing me when the world looked away. The words hit her with the force of a physical impact. She looked around, spinning in a slow circle, searching the platform, the stairs, the dark tunnel mouths. He was not there, yet the presence of the note made the station feel suddenly, impossibly intimate. He had been watching. He had waited for her to find her own path, and now he had stepped out of her life as quietly as he had entered it. She traced the ink on the page, the trembling of her own hands mirroring the memory of his. The search was over. She understood now that the gift was not the money, but the acknowledgement of her own humanity. Sarah stood still, the check pressed firmly against the notebook in her hand. The subway's rhythm continued, the high-pitched whine of wheels against steel, the rhythmic thud of departing feet, but the sound no longer felt like a cage. She folded the note, placed it in her pocket, and turned toward the stairs. Sunlight poured down from the street level, a stark, golden contrast to the dim platform. She climbed, each step purposeful. As she reached the top, the morning light washed over the street. She stopped. A woman stood by the entrance, struggling with a heavy bag, her eyes scanning the sidewalk with a frantic, lost expression. Sarah did not walk past. She did not check the time. She stopped, turned, and walked toward the woman. The hunger that had defined her existence for so long had vanished, replaced by a clarity that sharpened every detail of the world around her. She was no longer a person defined by the lack of a dollar, but by the capacity to provide what was needed. She reached the woman, extended a hand, and spoke. She had found her new purpose, and for the first time in years, she was exactly where she needed to be.